Allô, Nissan? Hey, grosse tempête, hein?
Hey, Karine, oui, je sais, les vilains bonhommes de neige sont de retour.
Mais avec le Nissan Rogue à traction intégrale, c'est pas stressant.
Exact, il est conçu et testé pour nos hivers. Oh, Karine, il y a un bonhomme dans le Rogue.
Ah, c'est correct. J'ai allumé les sièges chauffants.
Ah, bien joué, Karine. Maîtrisez toutes les conditions. Louez le Rogue S 2026 à partir de 0,4% jusqu'à 36 mois, incluant une réduction fidélité de 0,5% pour les clients Nissan admissibles. Jusqu'au 2 mars, sur approbation de crédit, les conditions s'appliquent. Détails chez Nissan.
I don't blame you if you missed this one. But yes, indeed, we did have a fall economic statement from the government on Monday. Of course, all the attention was on the old finance minister saying, I've had enough and I'm resigning from cabinet. But that fall economic statement revealed the deficit of $61.9 billion, over $20 billion higher than anticipated, and with more than $20 billion in new spending. Now, the update also promised investments in border security and Canadian business following the threats of U.S. tariffs from Donald Trump. Let's talk a little bit more about the numbers and just how bad or good they are. Moshe Lander's with us, senior lecturer in economics at Concordia University. Hi, Moshe.
Hello.
So, $61.9 billion deficit? Should we be concerned?
No.
No. No. Okay, tell me why.
No. Well, in your lead in there, you said that it was $20 billion higher than what was expected, and then you said there was $20 billion in new spending. And so the natural connection is, well, that $20 billion in new spending must be the $20 billion in extra deficit. That's actually not the case. Mm-hmm. The $20 billion extra on the deficit were one-off settlements from a variety of lawsuits that involved compensation payments that had to be made. That would have shown up in previous years' numbers had these suits not gone ahead or had they been settled more expeditiously, let's say. So I don't put a lot of stock in that any more than if you came to me and said, hey, I had this one-off expense this year. I had to call in a plumber. I wasn't planning on doing it. I'm not going to say you're recklessly irresponsible. The $20 billion in new spending that you highlighted is spread over the next 5 years. And so it's not necessarily evenly $4 billion per year, but because it's over 5 years, that extra deficit for last year is not affected by that. The deficits going forward are going to be marginally higher as that $20 billion is absorbed, assuming that it actually gets spent too.
So then I got to ask you this, based on what you just told me. All of the stuff, you know, when Chrystia Freeland says in her resignation letter that basically she cannot go along with these political gimmicks when it comes to spending. You know, it sort of sounds like, well, no, that actually wasn't happening. It sounds like, well, there were these lawsuit settlements, as you put it, and that's where that $20 billion extra comes from, and it wasn't really that bad. So does that help? Is there any insight here to parse out the news of the week?
Well, no, what she's angry about is the GST tax holiday that people might be enjoying over the next couple of months and the potential $250 checks that were promised to anybody earning less than $150,000. She has said through leaked sources she didn't support that idea. That would add over top of what they're presenting up to another $15 billion worth of deficit spending. And so where she's promising to try and keep the deficit under control and to maybe a path towards eventually balancing the budget 5 to 10 years out, if they're still in power, of course, she's saying you're not making that possible. And the league conversations that existed between her and the PM was that the PM said, look, I'm not worried about the economics, I'm worried about the politics, and Canadians are going to like this, and they're going to allow us to save what little face we have left at the election. She's saying, we've got no shot at the next election. Why are we spending this money and just giving fodder to the opposition to show that we are being reckless with money and we're not trying to make an attempt to be good economic stewards? Yeah,
because here's what I'm struggling with, Moshe, because the government had promised $40 billion. Now we end up with 61.9. Did they not know everything that you mentioned right off the top of this interview? Like, did they not know that was going to happen? Why is this why did it come out as such a surprise that we end up at almost $62 billion?
Yeah, you never know how settlements are going to go. You never know how much the actual number is. There's no point in putting those numbers in when it's not a done deal. And so I think there was an element that they probably knew that some settlement was going to come, and but they didn't necessarily know what the amount is. And I guess from a political standpoint, why get people riled up about something that you don't know for fact? You don't want to negotiate the potential. So I'm not going to say whether 20 billion was too big or too little. I don't know enough about the various suits to say that, but I think it was just a matter of, when those numbers came, they said, all right, let's dump it in the fall economic update rather than in the budget. It's not a matter of confidence. It's merely just informing the House. And so it's not something that can bring the government down, at least in theory. And so by the time we get to budget day, people are going to have a different focus.
Okay, so then some of the hullabaloo over 61.9 billion, exaggerated, not necessary, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that if we want to pick on things relating to the budget, there's other things to focus on, which is that the government doesn't have a path towards balancing their budget. Not that they necessarily have to make that their priority, but they have chosen to make it their priority. And so if they're going to try and tell us that we have a path, I don't see it. And so I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with them running deficits. I wouldn't have a problem with any party running deficits. But when you tell us that you're going to balance the budget, then you got to deliver what you promise. And if you're going to change your tune, then you better have a compelling reason. Unfortunately, because balancing the budget was never a good economic argument to begin with, you can't now say, well, we're going to use sound economics to explain why we're not going to balance the budget.
So we're with Moshe Lander from Concordia University on getting those budgets balanced. When does it become urgent? You know, I hear the debt to GDP ratio is actually dropping. So you know, how much more can you go on before you have to start balancing budgets?
So you and I have to, at some point, balance our budget, but I would suggest that you and I have to balance it over the course of our lifetime. When you and I were children, we ran deficits. We borrowed from the bank of mom and dad. When we got older, we borrowed from the actual banks to finance a mortgage or a car loan. During the productive working years of our life, we run a surplus. We're heading for retirement, Elias. And when we head for retirement, we're going to run deficits until we die. And so over the course of our lifetime, those should all balance out. Governments don't have a lifetime, though. Government will go on forever and ever. So they could run deficits in theory forever and ever and keep adding it to their pile of debt. What matters is that deficit being used to finance, say, 5G networks, making sure that bridges, roads, rails, airports, seaports are all functioning, making sure that Canada is secure and safe. If that's what they're using the deficit for, that's fine. And if the debt is growing in dollar numbers, if the economy is growing faster, then the debt to GDP ratio could be falling. If you and I have $500,000 in debt, but you and I are each earning $50 million a year, who cares? But if you and I are each earning $50,000 a year, that's going to keep us up at night figuring how are we going to pay for that. Same for the government.
So, I mean, that seems to me maybe the good news. I'm looking at the projected federal debt to GDP ratio, and that's actually dropping. So can you say, based on that, can you say, hey, there's some good news here?
Yeah, and if the debt to GDP ratio is dropping, that to me is the one that counts more than anything. But like I said, too, what was that debt used to finance? You and I want to go borrow money. You want to use it to build an extension on your home for your growing family. I want to use that money to finance a blowout trip to Vegas for me and my friends. Yeah. Yours is good debt. Mine is not.
What is the government doing?
For the government.
So what is the government doing? Is it akin to the trip to Vegas or akin to the extension on the house?
Yeah, I think they're more Vegas than house, unfortunately. And so that's the part that would worry me, that fine, the debt to GDP ratio is falling, but I don't see, like, Canada's infrastructure is falling apart, and there are so many industries that are non-competitive. So where they could be spending resources, I think, more productively, I think on balance, when they're misspending, it's usually more for Vegas than home.
Interest rates have dropped. I guess that makes financing our debt cheaper. It also drops the price of the Canadian dollar, right? Now below 70 cents. I don't know what it is today, but I saw it drop below 70 cents for the first time in forever. What about that aspect here? What do you say on the Canadian dollar and interest rates and how that all comes into play?
So It depends on what debt is coming due. If this was debt that was financed 20 years ago and it's coming due now, then it's not how have interest rates fallen between May and now. It's how do interest rates compare now to 20 years ago. It's the same thing when you redo your mortgage. It's not that interest rates have come down in the last 8 months that matters. It's that if you finance your mortgage 5 years ago, your interest rate now is higher than before. That could mean more trouble for you. So I think that you have to break down the structure of the government's debt and see what's coming due and where are they refinancing it. That could be an issue. The weak Canadian dollar is just potentially a source of inflation for the economy because we know in Canada a weak dollar is good for exports, but what that means is that more people want to buy our goods and services than before. If supply can't keep pace with it, it's going to push prices up, much in the same way that if everybody wants to get their hands on Taylor Swift tickets, that pushed the price of those things up. If nobody wants to get their hands on Montreal Canadiens tickets, the price of that thing goes down. So same sort of logic here. But the other problem, too, of course, is that anybody who's looking to go to Vegas is going to find that it's now going to cost a lot more Canadian dollars than before. That itself also becomes inflationary. So this could potentially be an issue. The government doesn't control the exchange rate. The Bank of Canada doesn't control the exchange rate. But it's certainly going to affect the numbers on the economy, and that's going to influence things then, like the size of the deficit, the debt, and how it compares to GDP.
Points to bringing up Las Vegas and Taylor Swift. Moshe Lander, it's always a pleasure.
Anytime.
Moshe Lander is a senior lecturer in economics at Concordia University.